Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video, I want to enhance our active response capabilities. If you haven't seen the first active response video where I introduce you guys to active response and how to familiarize yourself with it, I will link it in the top right corner of this video, so check that out before progressing with this one. But in this video, I want to introduce to you guys how we can use active response to block a specific user from successfully logging on to a server. So stay tuned and let's jump into it. But first, time for my shameless plug. If you want to learn more about our company, head on over to opensecure.co. If you would like to hire us for a project, select the Contact Us link in the description of this video. To see firsthand the power of open source, take advantage of our interactive demo. Select the demo link in the description of this video to start exploring. Now let's get back to the video. So let's say, for example, there are user accounts that are enabled within your environment that you don't want those user accounts to be allowed to log on to a server, right? So maybe this is a service account such as MySQL or an administrative account, and you have some account names that are required for software that's running on the servers to run, but you don't want to allow a user to log in with that particular username, right? And so what we can do is, of course, the best solution is to, within the Etsy password file, to add the no login parameter, right? So like with our OSEC user, I wouldn't be able to, this is a user account that exists on the server, but we see the no login parameter set here. So I would not be able to log in with the OSEC user. Even if I gave this user account a password and attempted to log in, I would get a deny, right? And so that's, of course, the best solution to disable accounts from being able to log in to a server that may be required for underlying software to run. But let's say, for example, we're imperfect humans in an imperfect world, and the security team is not always responsible for spinning up new servers. Maybe a kickstart or golden image that you provide to the ops teams who are actually responsible for spinning up these servers. They make some tweaks on their end that overwrite something that you have set on your end. So say, for example, you have a service account that, as part of the golden image, you specify that it should have this no login capability, but maybe it's missed somehow, or there's a hiccup within the kickstart process, or someone on your ops team has to do some maintenance or something and disables that no login capabilities and forgets to change it back. There's a handful of scenarios that can go wrong and ultimately be your downfall because someone made a silly mistake, right? And I always like to try to take things into my own hands when I can. So what I'm going to show you guys today is how we can, if one of these user accounts were missed, for example, and we don't want this user account to be logged in by anybody out from the outside, right? We can set up some active response around that. So if someone were to successfully log in with a particular username, we can enable active response, which will add their IP address that they logged in from to our firewall drops out. So it'll create a IP tables rule that will drop all traffic from their IP address, and they'll immediately lose their session. So although they would be able to successfully log on, immediately once they logged on, they'll lose their session and will get a rule to fire and will be alerted that, hey, someone is attempting to log in with a user account that we want to make invalid from logins. So what we'll do, similar steps to how we did the blacklisting IP address, right? So we'll first create a list. So we'll just add a new list file, and I'll just call this unauth or I'll just call it invalid users. And I will add an entry, and here we'll do, within our key fields, we'll just add the usernames. So I'll do like admin, it would be a username I wouldn't want to be allowed. And remember that this would be a user account that actually exists on the box, right? So like games or FTP, some of these user accounts that come pre-bundled with CentOS are existing. But say I had a MySQL admin or something like that, and MySQL required it to required that user account to run on the server, but we don't want it to be allowed to log in. We would add another key like that here. In this example, I'll just do hacker. I'll go ahead and add that and save. And let's actually go ahead and create user accounts for these guys, right? So I'll actually create a legit user. Okay, so let me do an add user, and I'll call him admin. So if I cat out the Etsy password file, I should see this user. And yep, here we go. And we also see that I don't have the no login, right? So I'm able to, well, once I set a password for this, and then we'll do a add user of hacker. And let's cat out the file. Okay, and we see our 2 users are now created. Let's add passwords to these guys. So I'll say, please subscribe and tell your friends. And I'll do the same for the hacker. I'll say, please subscribe and tell your friends. Okay, and now we should be able to log on with these guys. So if I say admin, please subscribe and tell your friends. Okay, we're able to log on. And if I do a who am I, you see I'm the admin user. If we do hacker, and I say please subscribe and tell your friends, we're able to log on as well. All right, so we have user accounts. We have them added to our invalid users list. So these are legitimate accounts that exist on our server. Let me go ahead and restart this so this saves. And then what we also need to do is add this to our config file, which would be under the manager, right? So the manager's osec.conf. If I scroll down, let me find it. Here we go, to our list, right, that we specify. So we need to specify our invalid users list before our list is completely ready to go. So this will just compile it. So if this is the manager that I have open here. So if I go into, I think it's under Etsy list. Yep. So we see our invalid users. Well, I have the .cdb here already because I've already compiled this on my end. But if you guys are just creating it, you would just have this invalid users. You wouldn't have the .cdb. So when you add it to your list here, so you would need to add it to your invalid users. Make sure I spelled that right. Yep, invalid users, and save, and then restart the manager. And then what that'll do is take your, essentially this is just a text file that we've created, and convert it to a .cdb so that the manager can actually read it and interact with it, right? All right, so we have our list set up. Now what we need to do is figure out a rule that would be good to make a child rule off of, right? So my goal here is to disallow, or anytime one of these user accounts successfully logs on to a server, I want to have active response trigger that immediately blocks that whatever IP address successfully logged in with that username, right? So let's find a good rule that will allow us to do something like that. Let me go ahead and filter out this. This will just be a nuisance, or I'll go ahead and filter that out. That doesn't, we don't care about that. Let's look for maybe a success. Let's see. So here we have an authentication success. And here we go. We can see, yes, let me go ahead and filter on this guy. And we can see when I successfully logged in as the admin and as the hacker. So this is a rule ID of 5715. So this would be a good rule to fit the problem that we're trying to, this will be a good rule that will fit our scenario, right? So if a user account, so admin or hacker, successfully logs on, that's exactly what happens, we'll create a rule that will trigger if an authentication success happens, and then that rule will compare against our invalid users list and say, hey, was the user that logged on a value within my invalid users list? And if it is, we're going to trigger an active response rule off of that, right? So let's go ahead and get into that. So we created our invalid users list. Now let's create our rule that'll compare the user that logs in with the values in the list, right? So I'll go back into management, into rules. I will go select custom rules, manage rules files, and select the edit here. And you see our previous example already with the malicious IP demo that we did before, right? So I will create a new rule, and I have this written already, so I'll copy and then write it through, walk you guys through it. So we have our group name. We're just specifying this as just invalid user. We have our rule ID, which of course we increment by 1. We have our if, so here is where we're actually getting into some logic. So we have our if SID, which stands for if signature ID of 5715. So what we're doing is creating you can think of it as like a child rule of the parent 5715. So this rule will only be evaluated against if the rule ID 5715 fires, which would be an authentication success, right? Because we don't want to waste processing time comparing this against every signature, every rule ID, if it's not an authentication success, right? We're only concerned with if someone successfully logs in, and then we're going to compare it against the username. So that's what the if signature ID is doing here. This rule will only be evaluated if 5715 fires first, right? So that triggers, and now we need to tell Wazuh, hey, I want you to compare a specific field, in our field here being user, against our list, right? So I'm saying a list field of user, and that correlates to what we have within our fields, right? These are all of our fields. We have agent ID, agent IP, agent name. Then we have some dynamic fields, data.dstuser.sourceIP. All right, so we have all these different fields that we could compare against. And in our case, we're concerned with the field that would contain the username, which in this example is the DST user, right? So I know that's kind of confusing. I actually ran into that same issue. So I originally had the field name of DST user, and it wasn't firing. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So I was doing some digging, and it turns out that I guess under the hood, Wazuh has decoders that parse out these specific fields. So it helps to do that. And it just under the hood, they expect the user string field name actually correlates to DST user. So I was a little confused for a little while, but finally figured it out, and had to go through some troubleshooting and learning, which I guess is never a bad thing. And that's why I make these videos for you guys, so you guys don't have to go through the hair pulling process of that. So figure that out. So keep that in mind. And it's kind of weird too, because like if I wanted to do like a specific like program name, I would actually copy the same field for whatever the same field name. So this would actually be program name and not some other like alias name, like how DST user actually correlates to user. So any other examples, you should be able to just copy exactly what you see in the field name itself. So like in this example would be, or if we wanted to do it on source IP, we would do it off a source IP like what we have here in the malicious IP group. So keep that in mind, and I know it's a little weird, but that's just how they read it under the hood. So we then have our lookup, right? And you can see above we did an address match key before, but if we look at their documentation, if I go down to, and this is actually all their rule options that you can do, right? So they really give you the flexibility to get really creative with your rules. And these are all options that I could include within rules that I want to create. So you have a lot of flexibility. And if I find the list options, you can see there's these lookup attributes we can assign, right? And so with the blacklisting of the particular source IP that attempted to log in, because our database or our list, our CDB list, contained IP addresses, we specified the address match key. So that's looking for an IP and the key to search within the CDB, and we'll match if the key is present. So this is telling Wazuh, hey, we're looking for IP addresses, where in our example, we're just going to use the match key because we're not using an IP address, we're using a username, and this will search the keys, which keys being, if we look back in our list, keys being this left column, right, where you have value on this other. So you could do like, you could get more sophisticated with the values. It's a little out of scope of this video, but I could assign them to like colors, like, so I could have a value of like red for these two, and say I created another one and I assigned it a yellow. So I could look up the key in value and determine then, okay, is this a higher severity alert that I want to have active response fire on, or is this a yellow where it's, you know, it's fine, I just want to be alerted on it, I don't want to block their IP address. So you can get more sophisticated with it. We're not doing that in this example. So I will use the lookup equal to match key, and then I specify my list, right, which is in our case the invalid users, and you want to specify the path as well, which you'll see here, and that comes pre-populated for you as well. So we're telling, so what this rule is doing is if signature ID 5715, so this guy, and authentication success fires, I want you to look at the user field and see if values within that user field match what's in my list, right? And if so, I want you to trigger an alert saying, hey, invalid user is successfully logged in, right? So let's go ahead and save and restart, and let's give that a shot and see what happens. And I always recommend having the ability to test your rules, right? So I don't want to immediately jump into an active response or adding active response for this rule yet without testing, because I could, you know, make a mistake and this rule actually fires on a lot of different rules, right? Or for a lot of different rules, which would not be good. And I could start to log everyone out, right, that actually needs access to our servers. All right, so let's go ahead and go back into here, and I'll get rid of this guy, and let's see if we can trigger this. So on the agent, let me go ahead and log in as admin, and please subscribe and tell your friends. And I will do the same for the hacker. And please subscribe and tell your friends. All right, now let's see if we generated that new alert. And here we go. Invalid user successfully logged in. So great, so that worked for admin. If I refresh one more time, I should see the hacker. Yep, and we see the hacker as well. So we know our rule is firing correctly and as intended. So that's good. Okay, so now we're alerted if the username that is within our invalid users list successfully logs on to a box. Now let's do some active response around this, right? So we can take it one step further and say, hey, if this rule fires, block the source IP that logged in, which in this case would be my 104 address, right? So let's go ahead and configure that. So if we go back into management under configuration, you guys should be familiar with the active response tag is within the osec.conf of the manager, and we're using the API and Wazuh app plugin to interact with that. So I can just let me copy the previous one that we did. So this is calling the firewall drop active response, which will create an IP tables rule that blocks the IP address that logged on with the particular username. So I'm specifying that here. That's the command. I'm doing a location of defined agent. So if we use the location of defined agent, we have to point to our particular agent ID, which in this case is 006. So I'll change that 4 to a 6. And instead of rules group, I'm going to do rules ID, because I only want active response to trigger off a particular rule ID, which would be the rule that we just created. So 100,006. So I'll specify that here. I'll do a timeout just of 20 seconds, and let me remove this repeat offender so I don't just log myself out for good. So what we're saying is if this rule ID 100,006, which is the one that we just created, triggers, then on agent ID 006, which is the agent that we're testing on, I want you to trigger this active response that will last for 20 seconds and so what should happen is once I save and restart this, once I log on to the server with the hacker or admin username, my session should immediately be dropped and I shouldn't be able to interact with the session, with the terminal anymore, right? All right, so that's restarted, and let's go ahead and give it a shot. So, duplicate this out. I'll log in as hacker and give the password, and I've logged in, and as you can see, I've immediately lost my session. I can no longer type, and we should see the rule fire. Yep, so host blocked by firewall drop active response. So this worked exactly as expected. And you can see my putty is coming back saying, hey, you lost your session, basically. So that should last for 20 seconds. So now, see if that 20 seconds is up. It is. So let me log back on. Log back on as root. And if I tail the active response log, wrong directory, active response.log, we can see that my IP address, let me make this a little prettier for you guys. My IP address was added to the drop list, right? So we see that here. And then the 20 seconds expired and it removed it from IP tables. So if I list out my IP tables here, my IP address would have been, sorry, it looks a little messy, but my IP address was added to the drop list. So an IP tables rule was created against my IP address to drop all traffic, and then it was deleted so I could log back on. So if we did the same for hacker, you know what, or for admin, let me actually open the console view of this. Here we go. and I can show you guys in real time. Okay, so let's tail the var osec log. Let's tail the active response log. And when I try to log in as admin now, or when I successfully log in as admin, I should say. So if I do enter the password, we can see that triggered. And if I load my IP tables, let me grep for less. You can see, bang, it's added here. I can't really highlight, but if you see where my cursor is, I'll dance my cursor for a sec. This row to the right, you can see the source is my IP address. Destination would be to any destination, right? That would be to anywhere. And the target, column 3 there, is set to drop. So the 20 seconds has probably expired. And we see that my IP address is no longer there. So active response worked as intended. It created an IP tables rule that dropped traffic from my IP address because I logged in with that admin username, and then removed it after the 20 seconds. So that works as intended. And then we get alerts on it here too, right? Like we see the host was blocked, and then we see it unblocked as well. So you can alert. So this gives you the ability to, you can alert your security team saying, hey, someone logged in with a username that we don't want people to be logging in with. What's great about the active response feature is that now we can proactively stop these people, right? Where before it would be, okay, great, we have an alert that fires that tells us, but it may take an hour or so or even longer before our security team even sees this alert, right? And that could lead, that's a lot of time to give an actual attacker the ability to enumerate more on your server or on your network, or maybe start to download malware, or whatever their intention is. That's a lot of time that's given, where with active response we can immediately disallow them from being able to log in anymore, right? So another scenario, maybe a disgruntled employee, right? Like all of a sudden an employee has become disgruntled and maybe catches wind that they're going to be terminated and starts to do not good things on the network, and you guys make wind of that. Well, you could add their username to our list very quickly, and then anytime they tried to log in using that username, they would be blocked, right? So they wouldn't be able to access any of your servers anymore. And that's taken into your own hands, right? You don't have to wait for your corporate IT or your data center operations team to update LDAP or Active Directory to remove their username, right? You can take it into your own hands and work much faster than relying on other teams. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Subscribe and leave a like, and if you don't mind, tell your friends. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next video.